I continue my systematic commentary of the preface to the first edition of the Science of Logic in the chronological order, and the previous videos are available in the playlist Die Wissenschaft der Logik, and to be honest, this is really important. This is the core of Hegel's philosophy, and so I continue. Just as the understanding, der Verstand, is usually taken as something separate from reason, die Vernunft, in general, so also dialectical reason, Vernunft, is taken as something separate from positive reason. So, I don't need to translate into German, but what Hegel means here is that the opposition, the separation, the distinction between der Verstand, which is the moment of abstraction, the negative Vernunft, which is the dialectical moment of negation, and the positive Vernunft, which is the moment of conceptual unity and concrete unity. These three moments, which according to Hegel are the logical moments of every speculative process, they are separated and distinguished by the understanding, by der Verstand. It is der Verstand, and I explained what der Verstand is, in my view, in the previous video. It is der Verstand which separates, distinguishes, and differentiates these three moments. But from the point of view of die Vernunft, they are one. So that's very important. Now I would read in German, because this is the most important quote and sentence in the whole preface, in my view. Maybe with the previous one, but one of the most important. So I will read in German. Aber in ihrer Wahrheit ist die Vernunft Geist, Spirit, der höher als beides, verständige Vernunft oder vernünftiger Verstand ist. I now read in English. This is very important. In its truth, reason is, however, spirit, which is higher than both reason bound to the understanding and understanding bound to reason. So it's if I had to use English words, I would say that the rationality of der Verstand would be rationalistic, and the rationality of reason would be rational. So the sentence would be, in its truth, spirit is rationalistic reason and rational understanding, so to speak. That's a way of looking at things. But I will make another video just to comment this quote, because it is really important. So now I skip the explanation for this quote, and I continue. I will comment in detail and thoroughly in the next video, just this sentence. So spirit, or it is the negative, that which constitutes the quality of both the dialectical reason and the understanding. So thinking abstractly through the mediation of der Verstand is a negative way of thinking, because it abstracts, so it leaves aside, and it's also one-sided. It's the determinate thinking and abstract thinking. So the understanding, der Verstand, is negative thinking, and dialectical reason is the negation of the abstraction of der Verstand. So it is also negative, and it is the negation of the negative. Yeah, and positive reason is speculative thinking, namely the unity of both opposites. This is really difficult. It negates the simple, thereby posits the determinate difference of the understanding, but it equally dissolves this difference, and so it is dialectical. To illustrate, at the beginning of Hegel's logic, there is pure being, just being. But just being is nothing, because there is nothing in pure being. There are no determinations. And if one asks the question, what is pure being? The question what requires that one brings forth determinations. To say what is this means what are the determinations of the object or the thing that you want to know. And it is impossible to say what pure being is, because there are no determinations in pure being. So the absence of any determination means that pure being is pure nothing. And because there is nothing within pure being, there is nothing, pure being is self-contradictory. It is being, but it is nothing also. So it's unstable. And this nothing within being is the movement which produces becoming, and the result of becoming is Dasein, which is being with a negation, determinate being. And this is how pure being or pure nothing determines itself, limits itself. And I will illustrate by a quote from Hegel and the Hermetic Tradition by Glenn Alexander Magee from Jakob Böhme. The eternal free will has introduced itself into darkness, pain, and source, and so also through the darkness into the fire and light, even into a kingdom of joy, in order that the nothing might be known in the something. And Jakob Böhme says that as transcendent God as a pure transcendence is merely a dark, inchoate will for self-revelation, which Böhme calls the Ungrund. And this pure emptiness, the Ungrund or the Abgrund or the abyss, the void, it is pure nothing. But as Hegel says, pure nothing is pure nothing. So the being of nothing is its own nothingness. And the nothing, I guess, wanted to know something. And something in German is etwas, and Dasein and etwas are some of the very first determinations of being, namely being with a limit, being with a determination. So, back to the science of logic, he says that the negative negates the simple, and I guess that pure nothing and pure being, the void or the supreme being, are simple because there is no complexity, no distinctions within nothing and pure being. So to negate that which is simple means to posit the determinate difference of the understanding. But then there is difference, distinction, separation within being, and the purpose of of reason, die Vernunft, is to dissolve this difference and to re-establish the identity. So Hegel says, spirit does not stay at the nothing of this result, but is in it rather equally positive, and thereby restores the first simplicity, but as universal, such as it is concrete in itself. So the movement is self-determination, which means self-limitation, self-negation. But then we have two moments. We have being and not being. And the purpose is to re-establish self-relation, which is infinite relation to self. We are here at the beginning of Hegel's logic with Dasein, Nichtsein, etwas, das Anders, das Unendliche, the infinite, and this spiritual movement, which in its simplicity gives itself its determinateness, and in this determinateness gives itself its self-equality. So self-limitation, self-negation, self-determination, and the positing of a determinateness within identity to self, which creates division, separation, difference, and trying through a spiritual movement to re-establish self-identity. This is the movement of being and of God, according to the logic. So it is thus the immanent development of the concept, and the concept is the fully determined, fully developed process of being becoming fully determined and becoming the essence, and the essence becoming the concept. This is a genetic process in Hegel's logic. So this immanent development of the concept is the absolute method of the concept, the absolute method of cognition, and at the same time the immanent soul of the content. So this is how being knows itself and moves itself, and it is the self-initiating process of being. It is being becoming conscious of itself and in relation to itself. On this self-constructing path alone, I say, is philosophy capable of being objective, demonstrative science. And Hegel says, no, not Hegel, I say, in order to understand Hegel and to understand any speculative philosopher, one has to consider that it's not the empirical man, whether Plato, Aristotle, Spinoza, Schelling, Hegel, whoever, who speaks about being or about spirit or about God, but to imagine that it is the spiritual content, what Hegel calls die Sache selbst, which speaks through them. This is very important because I wrote, this is not the philosopher who talks about God or about being or about spirit or about the divine or whatever, but God who talks about himself, or being who talks about himself, philosophy who talks about itself through the mediation of the empirical individual. So honestly, this is really difficult because this is quite confusing, but honestly, if I had a piece of advice to give to those who publish the Science of Logic is in this edition you have a picture of Hegel. This edition you have a picture of Hegel. So already it's confusing because it implies that the science of logic is the product of the mind of this empirical individual, Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, who was supposedly born in 1770 and died in 1831, the German austere philosopher. But the whole purpose of Hegel's philosophy is to teach us that philosophy speaks about herself independently of the individual who is just the receptacle of the universal speech. So the idea that Die Wissenschaft der Logik is a product of the mind of Hegel, the empirical individual, is already confusing. Yeah. So, he says, in this fashion have I tried to portray consciousness in the Phenomenology of Spirit. Consciousness is spirit as concrete, self-aware knowledge. So in the view of Hegel, the objective world is the manifestation of consciousness. The object, because consciousness is relation of a subject to an object, the object is the manifestation of the subject. But I have already, as an individual, asked myself, is the world a manifestation of my mind? How could I project a world unconsciously? This is I have no answer as of now. But anyway, the progression of this subject matter rests exclusively on the nature of the pure essentialities that constitute the content of logic. So the development of consciousness, any thinking representative mind, the movement of representation and thought and consciousness is driven, according to Hegel, by logical categories. And I have made videos on this channel in the playlist Die Wissenschaft der Logik, in which I try to explain that the development of consciousness, at least in the Western world, is partly, if not completely, moved and shaped and structured by logical categories. Yeah. He says, their self-movement is their spiritual life, and is that through which science constitutes itself, and of which it is the exposition. So the logical categories which will be introduced and developed and presented in the core of the science of logic are the self-moving thought, which, if I had to illustrate, it's like in the movie The Matrix, when the characters look at the screen with the green numbers flowing onto the screen. And there is the Matrix, and then there is the real Matrix, which is just a series of computer screens flowing, green numbers flowing on a computer screen. And the guy who is really smart can know what happens in the Matrix just by looking at the numbers. Like in the realm of video game development, a great and very smart developer can look at a series of codes and numbers and imagine what these numbers would represent in the game. The images, the actions, the gameplay mechanics. But it requires an enormous amount of intelligence and efforts to be able to see through the projection. Yeah. And then Hegel says, the first part of the system of science, according to him, is the phenomenology of mind, or the phenomenology of spirit. And the second part is constituted by the logic, which is the all animating soul, the pulse, the conceptual structure, the hidden code, whatever. And the two real sciences of philosophy, namely the philosophy of nature and the philosophy of spirit. And this trinity, logic, nature, science, logic, nature, spirit, which is the result of the phenomenology of spirit, would complete the system of science, namely all the knowledge that is possible to know. And there's a difference between the pure abstraction of logic, which according to Hegel is the mind of God, and the real sciences, and reality for Hegel means being with negation. The philosophy of nature is more real than the pure abstraction of logic, because it is the negation of the idea, what Hegel calls the idea, namely the totality of all logical determinations, because it is a physical presence. So it contains the negation of pure thought. It is thought in the form of sensuous presence. And the philosophy of spirit itself is the negation of nature. And the end goal of the development of spirit, which is consciousness in all its manifestations, subjective, objective, absolute, is to re-establish the pure thinking unity, the conceptual grasping of logic. So it's very complicated, because there is the phenomenology, namely the phenomenal appearance of mind and consciousness. There is the logic, there is the philosophy of nature, and there's the philosophy of spirit. And all are intertwined. So we are reaching levels of complexity which are well, complex. And I will this video will be shorter than the other, and probably shorter than the next, but I will just say one thing. He says that the self-movement of the logical categories, which is reflected in the self-movement of the mind and of spirit in the conscious life, it's a self-initiating process. And what I have noticed from personal experience is that I have met, so to speak, not empirically but intellectually, people who are very smart and even spiritual, and what most of them have in common, not all, because I will talk about this in the next video, there can be an access to spirituality without the mediation of der Verstand. This is the topic of my next and final video about the preface, but here I'm talking about spiritual people who are always on the move, who are always driven by a quest, a drive, an impulse to gather knowledge and to understand and to think and to reflect and to connect. And these people are the more spiritual because they are always moving, they are always driven by a thirst for understanding. And there are most people, the huge majority of people, they do not ask themselves many questions. And I don't blame them, because in real life one has to work, to get a job, to find a mate, to take care of the children, to rest and go on holiday and have leisure, because working is exhausting, and people just want to take off their unplug their brain after days of work and just watch TV or read a book, but they are not in a quest of understanding everything. It's only a select few who go on this path of gathering knowledge. And I have just noticed that the most spiritual people are not always, but usually those who are on a constant quest for understanding, driven precisely by the understanding, by their Verstand, eventually reach spirituality. Because they are constantly struggling against themselves and against their own views and against the external world to try to grasp, and that's exhausting. And I have recognized myself partly in some of these people because that's the way I function. I am never satisfied. I am never at rest. I am never in a state of calm. I am always thinking and negating and questioning and doubting. And if I had to be honest, I enjoy this partly, but also it's exhausting. And I would like to be able to sit and to rest and to unplug my mind but I can't. So yeah. And now I will end up with a joke by Slavoj Zizek. That's not my joke. I borrowed a joke from Slavoj, but I find this joke particularly funny. It's also very dirty, but here's my translation. This is a wonderfully vulgar Jewish joke to illustrate the negative aspect of their Verstand. And yeah. A tired Polish Jewess, a Jewish female, comes home after a hard day's work. Her husband comes home too, exhausted and tired, but full of sexual lust and desire. He says, "I can't make love to you now, darling, but I need to relax. Would you please suck my dick and swallow my cum? I would enjoy it a lot." The wife answers, "I'm too tired for this, honey. Why don't you masturbate and ejaculate in a glass? I will drink your cum tomorrow." That's the joke. That's disgusting, but it's quite comical. So the comment of Zizek, because Zizek is not a clown, he always, he's a clown, but he's more than a clown. He always brings in philosophical remarks in his jokes. He says that this illustrates the classical opposition between the feminine intuitive reasoning versus the masculine analytical mind. And this analytical mind is der Verstand. And here in this joke, we have a feminine use of the understanding of der Verstand, namely to separate things which usually go together. So if you separate the blowjob, that's how it's called, I guess, into different parts, if you abstract a moment of the process from the whole process, you end up with these kind of weird, to remain polite, moments. So this is the negative aspect of der Verstand. So it's ambiguous because reason is the blowjob in his totality, and der Verstand is the wife who says, "I will drink the content of the glass tomorrow." And I wanted to make to insert a song by Lady Gaga, beautiful, dirty, rich, and I guess that Slavoj Zizek has a beautiful mind, a dirty mind, and a very rich mind, and Hegel also. And if I were to be honest with myself, I would say that I know that I have kind of a dirty mind, maybe I have a rich mind, maybe I'm capable of developing rich and wealthy ideas, because the whole purpose of the negation, as Hegel says, is to enrich the content, because pure being was empty, so there was a need for negation to bring wealth. Hegel keeps talking about the wealth of the substance, so the substance is very rich. It's kind of dirty also. Is it beautiful? I know that God has a beautiful mind. That I know. Do I have a beautiful mind? Am I capable of producing beauty? I don't know. But you can end up this video by listening to the song Beautiful, Dirty, Rich by Lady Gaga. Because, to be honest, I love Lady Gaga. And I love Slavoj Zizek. And I try to love Hegel. That's not always easy, but I will make one last video to comment about spirit. So